Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 185, Agnes Denieff. Agnes Denieff was born in 1865 in Balmain, New South Wales, to Martin John Denieff and Eliza Mary Elizabeth Goulder. She was the third born of 9 children. Martin Denieff was Irish and came out to Australia by the time he was 20, when he married Eliza, who was Scottish, in 1860 at Barrabar, New South Wales. In April 1874 in Sydney, Martin Denieff was fined 5 shillings and 5 shillings 6 costs of court for a breach of the Publicans Act. In August 1875 in Sydney, there was an advertisement lost or stolen from Martin Denieff, boot and shoemaker of New Pitt Street, while drunk in the bar of the Nil Desperandum Hotel, silver, lever watch and silver, totalling £4.15. By October 1890, Martin Denieff was summoned by his wife Eliza for maintenance. After much evidence had been taken, the defendant was ordered to pay the complainant 10 shillings a week for 12 months, with £1 1 shilling professional costs and 5 shillings and 10 costs of court. On the 13th of April 1901, Eliza Denieff passed away in Fremantle, Western Australia, after an operation at the age of 62, says the dearly beloved mother of Mrs. James Doyle of Queensland and Mrs. W. Curtin and Mrs. A. Ferguson of Sydney. There was a memoriam in 1904 for Eliza, in sad but loving remembrance of our dearest mother, Eliza Denieff, who departed this life in April 1901, a kinder and more loving mother hard in this world to find, inserted by her sorrowing family. In March 1909, there was a death notice for Agnes's father, Martin Denieff. At St Vincent's Hospital, the 9th of March 1909, Martin Denieff, bootmaker, late of Essex Street, City, 70 years. Agnes had married Robert B. Ferguson in Sydney in 1883. However, in the residential listings, she's still listed as Miss Agnes Denieff, living in Oxford Street. There was also an advertisement in the Police Gazette from Sydney saying stolen at 8 p.m. from the person of Agnes Denieff, number 17 Macquarie Street South, whilst in a crowd in Oxford Street, a silver open-faced Geneva watch with a portion of a silver Albert chain attached. On the 21st of November 1884, in the Victorian Nagambie Times, it says, on Sunday night last, Swan's Hotel was broken into by the back entrance and several articles, including a pair of red blankets, were stolen. Mr. Swan missed the articles at an early hour on the following morning and gave the information to the police, who at once went in search of a suspicious person named Charles Jules, who had recently opened a barber's shop in the township. On examining his premises, several of the stolen articles were found, but the tenant had flown and no one knew where. Constable Haynes immediately set out on horseback and, after scouring the district, came upon the suspected individual near Beam's Hotel, a distance of 4 miles from Nagambie. He was immediately searched and the missing blankets, which were afterwards identified by Mr. Swan, were found concealed in his swag. His excuse? That he purchased the blankets from some person unknown. This was lame, and the energetic officer placed him under arrest and brought him to the local watch house. He is known by the police to be Frenchman, but is endeavouring to pass himself off as an Italian, and which is leading the constables to believe that the prisoner is an escaped French convict. A couple of weeks later, on the 5th of December 1884, again in the Nagambie Times, Kilmore General Sessions, Monday the December the 1st, 1884. Burglary, stealing and receiving. Charles Jules, a Frenchman, was placed in the dock under committal from Nagambie. Mr. Johnson explained the charges with which the prisoner was accused, and the whole of the charges related to the same articles: 1 pair blanket and 2 teacups. The accused was at Nagambie with a man named Denny for a week or 2. The latter was employed by Mrs. Susan Swan, and Jules was in the habit of visiting Denny. Mrs. Swan had proceeded to church on a Sunday evening and locked all the doors except the back one. The next morning, Mrs. Swan missed a pair of blankets, and on searching the house where prisoner and Denny lived, they disappeared. On information being conveyed to the police, both men who had taken their departure were overtaken, and the blankets to which Mrs. Swan would swear were found in his possession. A statement was made by the prisoner at the police court and it was read, with the deposition being signed by a magistrate being evidence. Susan Swan, wife of a storekeeper at Nagambie, deposed on oath. The blankets to which this case referred belonged to me. I know the prisoner. I knew him for about a week before the robbery. I engaged his mate, Charles Denieff, as an ostler, that is, someone employed to look after the horses and stables. I let the prisoner stop 4 nights in the house. 4 days after the prisoner left me, he took a barber's shop, both having left me then. On that evening, I fastened up the place before going to church. That was at 7 o'clock. I returned about 8 and secured the doors. The back doors had a bolt. I rolled an empty beer barrel to it in order to secure it. The barrel was standing on its end. About 9 o'clock I went to bed. About 7 the next morning I saw the back door wide open and the barrel thrown to one side. I searched the bedrooms on each side of the door and I missed blankets that were on the bed the night before. The prisoner and his mate previously occupied the room. I went to the house of Denny and the prisoner and found they were gone. I found 2 teacups produced that were my property. I went to the police and I never authorised the prisoner or anyone to take the blankets. The prisoner's mate, after I came home from church, came to the kitchen door and asked me if my husband had come from Melbourne. William Griffiths deposed on oath. I am a labourer employed by Mr. Swan. I know the prisoner as well as Denny. I saw Denny on the night of the 16th. I did not see the prisoner there. I went to bed between 9 and 10. I slept in the kitchen 10 or 15 yards away. And another witness deposed the prisoner and his mate lived next door to me at Nagambie. I never saw blankets with them, and I saw Denny at 5 o'clock standing at his own door. John Bird Haynes, a constable stationed at Nagambie, deposed, I know the prisoner and Denny of Nagambie. On the morning of the 17th, in consequence of the information I received, I went in search of the prisoner and his mate and overtook them 5 miles from the Seymour side of Nagambie. I called upon them to stop and told them I wanted to examine their swags as some property was stolen. Charles Jules was suspected. Denny said, all right. Prisoner also said all right, and I commenced to undo his swag, and I found the blankets produced in the prisoner's swag. I cautioned the prisoner in the usual way and asked him where he got the blankets from. He said he brought them from a man with bushy whiskers at Nagambie for 2 shillings. I arrested the prisoner. I did not arrest Denny, and I kept possession of the blankets. The prisoner, in cross-examining the witness, attempted to show the blanket was the property of his mate. John Heath, a butcher at Nagambie, deposed to seeing the prisoner and his mate at 5 o'clock on the 17th of November. They were walking in a paddock towards Seymour from Nagambie, and they were each carrying a swag. Constable Haynes was recalled and swore the statement of the prisoner, which was produced, made through an interpreter who was present. The prisoner then, through the interpreter, said he did not steal the blanket. It was his mate who had done the deed. His Honour then charged the jury and carefully sifted through the earliest points of evidence, and the jury, after brief consultation, found the prisoner guilty of receiving. His Honour sentenced him to 9 months' imprisonment, the first fortnight of the first 3, 6 and 9 months in solitary confinement. And another follow-up article on the 5th of December in the Nagambie Times, surely Charles Jules did not anticipate for a moment that just stealing a pair of blankets was such a serious crime as it turned out. Why, it was worse than tin kettling. It is very evident that Judge KC has not a very good opinion about the jewels that come from Nagambie when he pressed a sentence of 9 months. But the Frenchman will be in safekeeping, and I don't suppose he'll try the same trick again. And then a week later, on the 12th of December, in the Nagambie Times, a DeLacy Evans in Nagambie. And just an aside, I did an episode, which was episode 102, on Edward DeLacy Evans, if you want to know the story behind that as well. The townsfolk were somewhat startled on Tuesday morning when it was rumoured that Charles Denny, the mate of Charles Jules, who was sentenced to 9 months for receiving, was arrested and found to be a woman disguised in male attire. The rumour was at first doubted, but a day later the statement was confirmed. Charles Denny, as we shall still call her, resided in Nagambie for about 14 days with Jules, and many of the residents would remark as he walked along what small feet and hands the man has got. Denny would constantly have the pipe in her mouth, and on one occasion told a rather good tale to a certain lady in Nagambie as to his reason for residing in this city, which was to the effect that about a year ago he seduced a girl in Sydney, and as his parents and friends prohibited the marriage, he was compelled to clear out. Our readers were acquainted with other facts until Denny reached Seymour, where he took up his abode with a local barber there and remained for 2 weeks. A warrant has been issued for the arrest of Charles Denny as being the person who stole the blankets from Swans, and although Sergeant Purcell was inclined to believe that the barber's mate was his man, he was bailed from making an arrest through the fine set of teeth in his mouth, which the man Denny was not supposed to possess. However, at the end of the fortnight, a row took place between the barber and his new acquaintance, and in the scuffle, the teeth dropped out. Sergeant Purcell was immediately on the scene of the action, and this time identified Denny as the man he wanted, and said in a mild tone, "You are the man I want." And she replied, "I'm not a man, I'm a woman." She was then removed to the watch house, where she gave the name of Agnes Denieff. She's 19 years of age and will be tried at Nagambie on Wednesday. So in the Traralgon Advertiser on the 12th of December, a young person giving the name of Charles Denny, alias Agnes Denieff, of prepossessing appearance, dressed in male attire, was arrested by Sergeant Purcell on Tuesday for stealing blankets at Nagambie and also with concealing her sex with the intent to mislead. She's remanded to Nagambie on the first charge and Seymour on the second. She has for some short time been residing with a local barber named O'Connell, and her disguise was so perfect that her real sex was not suspected. So in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, small article from Melbourne titled "A Female Fraud." A young woman who's been going under the name of Charles Denny appeared before the Seymour court this morning, charged with stealing a pair of blankets and impersonating a man. She was remanded for a week. She's said to be the daughter of a respectable resident in Sydney and came to Melbourne with a Frenchman named Jules, recently convicted of receiving stolen property at Kilmore. And on the 19th of December 1884 in the Benalla Northeastern Ensign, a man-woman. At the Nagambie Police Court on Wednesday, a woman giving the name of Agnes Denieff, alias Charles Denny, was charged with burglarously entering Swans Hotel Nagambie and stealing. She was the companion of Charles Jules, who was sentenced on the 1st at Kilmore Sessions to 9 months' imprisonment for the same offence. She asserted that Jules was an escapee from New Caledonia, that she'd met him in Sydney and lived with him for 9 months, and that they came to Melbourne where he committed several burglaries and pawned the proceeds. She gave the name of the pawnbroker as Samuels. Jules, she said, pawned her wearing apparel and compelled her to dress in male attire. She said that Jules committed several petty larcenies and that he followed the occupation of a hairdresser at Nagambie for a fortnight, and that she was married to a man named Robert Ferguson, a cab proprietor at Surrey Hills in Sydney, who had deserted her. The woman is 19 years old and was committed to take her trial in the next General Sessions in Melbourne. And it says, as full feminine costumes are not part of the stores kept at country police stations, the young lady will be transferred to Melbourne in male attire. And then there was nothing for quite a while until the 16th of July 1897. I found an article in a Brisbane paper titled French Escapees. At the City Police Court on Friday, Jean-Dominique Spadeau, alias Charles Jules, he was amongst one of 4 escapees from New Caledonia who were brought up on remand, and after official evidence had been given by the warder from the penal establishment, they were ordered to be detained for prison for 15 days and then handed over for transmission to New Caledonia. Agnes had a son, Frederick James John Valentine Ferguson, on the 14th of February 1898 in Sydney. He was committed into state care on the 23rd of January 1900. In his admittance papers, stated that Agnes was in the care of her sister, Elizabeth, Mrs. Curtin, who lived at Redfern. It also stated that Agnes had left Fred with Mrs. Sedley of Manly. Mrs. Sedley had died and her daughter could not keep Fred. The record stated that Agnes had served time in jail for prostitution. Fred had 8 foster parents and was discharged on the 14th of April 1915. And sure enough, I found on the 10th of November 1900 an Agnes Denieff living at 15 Alberta Street, Surrey Hills, New South Wales, that got 3 months hard labour at Billiola Jail at Cockatoo Island and was described as a common prostitute, born in Balmain, married and 34 years old. And the article relating to that was in the Sydney Australian Star that said a week ago Sergeant Jeffeys produced 2 young women named Eddie Donovan and Agnes Denieff before the Central Bench on charges of vagrancy and gave a deplorable account of the way they lived. An empty house in Alberta Street served them for shelter, and when danger threatened, their male companions were dumped into a cellar. An old mattress was drawn over the flap and kept there until the coast was clear. Both the girls pleaded tearfully for a respite and promised to leave the colony if they were given a week to do it. Anyway, they would quit the metropolitan area, which was as much as could be expected of them. Today, however, they appeared again, and Jeffys reiterated the story of their dissoluteness in a pathetic manner, as they had previously asked to be given a chance. Mr. Mayor SM was so affected that he gave them 3 months each in a large island home, much more clean and tidy than their former Alberta Street residence. And on the 25th of November 1901, it stated that she was again in Biloela Jail at Cockatoo Island, 37, born in Balmain, husband of Robert Ferguson in New Zealand, sentenced to 7 days for riotous behaviour with several others. And on the 11th of January 1905 in the Sydney Australian Star, a woman who answered to the name of Agnes Ferguson or Denieff was at the Central Court this morning committed for trial on a charge made by Senior Constable Bennett of stealing from the person of James Mulhall the sum of £3.07. James Mulhall came to town from Wellington and had a good time in business and recreation. He had bought a turnout and was going along home to the country, having the wiles and woes of a big city far behind him. In fact, he was going home in the new turnout. Well, he had the bad luck to strike a locality where churches are scarce and women are not, and in the course of his peregrinations, so the evidence went to show, he bumped up against Miss Ferguson, who, without waiting to be introduced, said to James, "I want 6 pence to have a drink. Ain't you going to shout?" Well, James said he wasn't particularly bent in that direction. He only drank ginger beer and he wasn't thirsty just then. She was, however, and James, like Adam of old, gave in. By and by they went to a house. In that house was a room, and in that room a bed. In James's pocket was a purse. On one side of that purse was £3, and on the other 7 or 9 shillings. Miss Ferguson went downstairs. James looked for his purse. There was 3.5 pence in it, and Constable McBride was called in. He secured Agnes, and Agnes said she would not be tried by Mr. Wilshire. She would leave it to a jury, and a jury would decide. So on the 11th of February 1905 in the Sydney Australian Star, a middle-aged woman named Agnes Ferguson was charged at the Metropolitan Court of Sessions before Judge Backhouse yesterday with having stolen £3.07, the property of James Mulhall. The case for the Crown was that the prosecutor, a Wellington farmer, had met the accused in the vicinity of Darling Harbour and after being in her company some time missed the money alleged to have been stolen. The accused denied the theft. After a rather lengthy retirement, the accused was found guilty and sent to 4 months in prison with light labour. And there's a death record for an Agnes Ferguson in 1906 in Sydney, aged only 40. Her parents were not named on a death certificate, and she was buried on the 26th of September 1906 in the Rookwood Cemetery. A little on Agnes's siblings. There was a memorial notice placed for her sister, Mary, in 1887 in Sydney, and it says Mary Louise Wilson, wife of Frederick Wilson and the daughter of Martin and Eliza Denieff, died on the 18th of November 1885 at the age of 21. Also her sister Amelia Denieff, who died on the 2nd of July 1886, aged 10, inserted by their mother Eliza. So the oldest child of Martin and Eliza Denieff was Mary Louisa Loser Denieff, and she married Frederick Martin Wilson, a commercial traveller, on the 7th of April 1884 in Glebe in New South Wales. They had a son, Frederick Reginald Wilson, who was a painter and a decorator, on the 7th of April 1884. There was a death notice in the Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser stating Mary Wilson on November the 15th, 1885 at her mother's residence of inflammation, aged 21. Agnes had a younger sister, Elizabeth Denieff, and she was born in about 1865 in Sydney. She married William Curtin in 1896 in Sydney when she was 31. There was also a reference in February 1892 in regards to Thomas Denieff, or Denny, who is implicated in the death of a sailor in George Street, Sydney, and is a well-known Sydney boxer. So that is where it seems that she had her male alias surname from. It seems that the family quite often alternated with the surname Denieff and Denny. Thomas Denieff was born in 1871 in Balmain. I found a man with quite a long New South Wales jail record, and he came under quite a few different aliases: Thomas Dennehy, Thomas Dennison, John Denny, Jeremiah Denny, and Joseph Denny. The birth year does match, and his occupation is a bootmaker, which seems likely as his father was one as well. And he had 20 previous convictions at the time that a photo was taken in 1902. And then in a later jail record in 1911 at Maitland, it had his name as Thomas Dennison and aliases as Joseph Dennehy, Thomas Dennison, John Denny, Jeremiah Dennehy, Thomas Dennehy, and Dennis John Dennehy. And there was a range of drunken disorderlies, assaulting constables, indecent language, loitering, stealing. And family tree records have him as dying at the age of 54 on the 17th of October 1925 in Melbourne. Another younger sister was Agnes Denieff. She was born on the 30th of July 1873 in Balmain. She married James Doyle in 1890 in Sydney when she was 17. And when their mother died in 1901, she's mentioned in the notices as living in Queensland at that time. And Alice died on the 27th of August 1960 in Queensland at the age of 87. James and Alice had 2 boys and 2 girls. As mentioned, there was a younger sister, Amelia, who was born in 1876 in Sydney and died at the age of 10. And the next sibling in the family tree is Martin John Denieff Jr. Martin was born in 1877 in Sydney, and at the age of 16, he departed for America for his boxing career. He arrived in San Francisco in March 1893 on the Mariposa. By the time he was 18, he had returned to Australia where he married Lily Adelaide White. They had a daughter, Dorothea Denieff, in February 1898 in Perth. By 1910, he's listed in Portland, Oregon, and he had his naturalisation and declaration at that point, and it stated that Martin John Denieff was 41 and a cafe proprietor. He then married Viola Huber in Montana on the 28th of March 1916 when he was 39. He divorced Viola before 1940, and he died on the 17th of April 1944 in Queensland at the age of 67. In the Brisbane Courier Mail on the 15th of September 1944 in the law notices, it states, Martin John Denieff, also known as John Denny, late of Alfred Street, Fortitude Valley, old age pensioner. In a 1928 article in Queensland that was recollecting old-time boxers, it says, Mr. Martin Denny, whose name re-echoed throughout the boxing world 40 years ago almost as much as it does the name of Tunney or Dempsey at the present time, is now in Warwick in connection with an entertainment enterprise. With over 100 fights to his credit, Mr. Denny's been pitted against most of the famous fighters of Australia, England and America. Mr. Denny, a native of Sydney, does not look his 60 years, nor does he carry evidence as having met many men much bigger and heavier than himself when he carved his name on the scroll of fame in the boxing world. Following his success in Australia, Martin went to America in 1893. He had bouts in San Francisco, Chicago and New York. Then all the shutters were up and the Shorten Law prohibited fighting. So Mr. Denny continued his journey to England. In Great Britain, Denny won several contests in which he won the lightweight championship of England. Subsequently, he returned to America where he fought on and off for about 15 years. He and Tom Tracy, another Australian, joined up in the hotel business and each used to have a contest occasionally as a sideline or an advertisement for the house. Mr. Denny lived for 33 years in America and was doing well in the hotel trade until prohibition swept across the states. He conducted saloons in San Francisco, Springfield, Portland, Oregon and Butte in Montana. About 18 months ago, a dinner was given by the Sporting Fraternity of Brisbane to Mr. Martin Denny, who is well respected and well known throughout Australia. Another younger sister was Catherine Denieff, known as Kitty, who was born in 1878 in Sydney. She married Reginald Andrew Blalock on the 2nd of April 1896 in Sydney when she was 18. He was the son of a solicitor in Sydney and late of London, and the grandson of the late Reverend D. Blalock. They had 2 sons, one that was stillborn. Reginald Blalock died in 1903, aged only 28, in Broome, Western Australia. His death notice states that on July the 6th, 1903, at Broome of enteric fever, Reginald Andrew Blalock, son of David Blalock JP of North Sydney and secretary of the Roebuck Lodge of Freemasons, aged 28. And Agnes's youngest sister was Margaret, who was born in 1880 in Sydney. She married Robert Gaythorne Clark in Kalgoorlie in 1903 when she was 23. He was a miner and a publican. Kitty then went on to marry Edmund Mercer Ryder in 1910 in Victoria when Kitty was 32. And Kitty died in Abbotsford, Victoria on the 16th of May 1951 at the age of 73. A little more on Agnes's son, Frederick James John Valentine Ferguson. Frederick enlisted in World War I at Kiama, New South Wales on the 8th of May 1916, so only a few months after he was released from state care. He was working as a farmhand at the time of his enlistment at Gerrara Vale in New South Wales. He stated on his enlistment papers that both of his parents were deceased. He was discharged by the July as he was judged as unlikely to become an efficient soldier due to failing range practice tests, and the reason was his nervousness when firing a rifle. He was transferred to the Administration Office of the Army in Sydney. Frederick attempted to apply for a war disability pension on the 1st of June 1917 for his nervousness, but was denied. He married Lillian Elizabeth Fuller in Victoria in 1921. They separated in 1923 and divorced in 1942. He then enlisted in World War II in Sydney. Frederick commenced divorce proceedings against his wife, Lillian Elizabeth Ferguson, whereabouts unknown, on the grounds of desertion for 3 years in October 1942. Says Frederick John Valentine Ferguson, petitioner, and Lillian Elizabeth Ferguson, respondent. To Lillian Elizabeth Ferguson, formerly of Evans Street, Port Melbourne, in the state of Victoria, but now of whereabouts unknown, take notice that your husband, Frederick John Valentine Ferguson, has commenced proceedings in the Supreme Court of Victoria for a divorce on the grounds that you have, without just cause or excuse, wilfully deserted the said petitioner, and without any such cause or excuse, left him continuously so deserted during 3 years and upwards. Frederick then married Emmeline Maud Anderson, known as Emma, in 1943 in Victoria. Frederick died on the 16th of February 1973 in Heidelberg, Victoria, aged 73, and the informant stated that his parents were unknown. So I hope you enjoyed the interesting story of Agnes Denieff, yet another young lady that masqueraded herself as a man. I'm actually astounded at how many cases I've found and episodes I've developed with women that have chosen to go down this path, whether for criminal reasons or for other reasons such as earning a living. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.